Yeah, okay, well, let's get started. I'd like to call to order the January 7th meeting of the 7-Eleven Committee. And let's start with the pledge to the flag. Okay, ready to begin?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, please take a look at the agenda, and if we have any emergency additions or modifications, I'll hear those. Otherwise, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda as written.
I move to approve the agenda. I'll second that.
Any discussion? All in favor of approving the agenda as written?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Now take a look at the minutes.
At the stellar minutes.
Stellar, yeah, detailed minutes. I'll give you a few minutes to look at that. If you have a chance to.
Remember that we did on
I will make a motion to approve the minutes as written.
Do we have a second on the minutes?
the numbers.
A second.
Any discussion?
I have a question. It may not rise to the level of needing to be included in the minutes, but my notes from the meetings noted that when Steve Weed was speaking, at nearly the end of his time, I think, he said something about his son had just gone into the Ojai Valley Charter School and that it might not survive because of water issues. Didn't make any sense, but I'm curious about the charter school. When I had a townhouse in Redondo Beach, there were charter schools down there, but they were part of the school district. They were run by different rules and things, but they were still part of the district. Is that true here?
Ours is sort of a hybrid, and Andy is on the board, so I'll let him, since he's on your committee, I'll turn it over to him. But essentially, we're now talking about an organization about 11 to 12 years old that is authorized by the school district, so that it's under our general aegis, but it is not part of the district. So now, I'll turn it over to you. You're the Valley Oak Charter expert.
Well, just a little more about the charter school. It's we have it capped at 75 students right now. They currently have around 72 students, independent study, basic program. They currently are housed at OBCC. They did purchase the Ojai Valley Community Church.
Oh,
Off of Tico and
Luna?
Loma and
Luma.
Alseco.
Thank you. Yes. Still learning my streets. But they did purchase an approximately 2-acre lot right by St. Thomas Aquinas, right past Harem. And they purchased it with an understanding from the water district in Myers Oaks that they had water access, or we're going to be able to tap into the local Myers Oaks water.
from over there.
No, so the property they purchased is in Myers Oaks. They're currently in that church facility, but they purchased vacant land that they'd like to build a school on. We would like to build a school on. They had the water rights that were linked to the local Myers Oaks Water Company or Water Authority. Unfortunately, Myers Oaks water has really been tapped dry, and so they're taking water from Casitas. Casitas is refusing to grant any new issuances for water rights through them. And so even though the charter school has water rights through the Myers Oaks, they're not able to currently get water through Casitas. So that's really the big hang-up, is it's a conflict between Casitas and Myers Oaks and the source that Myers Oaks is receiving the water from. They have made a request, and this, given that we're talking about them, may be an appropriate time, that they would potentially be interested in property if the committee does make a recommendation that the board ultimately chooses to act on. If there was a smaller school site or a section of a school site that may be available, they said they absolutely want me to voice that interest, and they want to be involved in the conversation.
So repurpose or partial repurpose of the
Right.
campus.
Correct.
You said capped at 75, so
Correct.
is that a limit imposed by the school district?
Yes.
How many students are right now on charter school?
What's that?
How many students are right now currently?
It's low 70s, 70, 71 is
Okay.
where they often hover. And they have a lot of students coming in and out of the program by its nature being independent study. Students coming in and out of the Ojai School District as well as from other independent study programs, private schools as well.
All right, back to the minutes. Any other comments or questions, or do we have any clarifications, changes, anything?
Just want to thank Marianne. She always does an amazing
Terrific job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes as written?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. We'll now take public comments. Do we have anyone from the public who wishes to comment at this time? Okay, thank you. And now on to our main agenda item. And yeah, I think you have all picked up, I hope everyone's picked up a packet. We're going to have a presentation here from Hank and other personnel of the school. Did you get one of these? No. Yeah.
I'll grab
Oh, here,
it. I'll grab
right here.
it.
Should
Yeah.
be enough.
I've got mine.
Does everybody have one?
I picked it up.
Is it,
I only need them.
there's the,
Thank you.
If you have extras, Andy?
does anyone else need a map or the packet?
Andy, is the pack-
Hi, James.
Andy, is the package just these and the map?
Correct.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, some of the copies. I think you need that or should I put it in the back?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Ready?
Hank, I'll turn it over to
Okay,
you.
thanks.
Yeah.
The only problem I have with being here is that I've noticed, Chris, you can commiserate here when, right, the camera comes like right over our uncovered spot,
Right.
but since there won't be millions of people watching this,
Call it fryer.
I
Yeah.
guess I'm okay.
I've used my head as a
When I'm
signaling
over
device.
there, I said I could,
Yeah. I've used my head as a signaling device for, reflection of things and,
So,
in the backcountry.
it actually has been fun to be in the audience for your first 4 meetings. I think it was your 5th, and been able to come to all of 4, I think, and part of 1, or all of 3 and part of 1. So I'll go over this in a minute, but I want to thank, sort of half turning here, to Catherine, Dawn, and Cheryl, and Teresa. Teresa's been here pretty much every meeting, right? But it's good to have the other 3, and Marilyn Smith, who's the 5th finger in their hand, right? Would have been here, except she's on her way with her husband down to Long Beach to see their granddaughter play college basketball. But they never miss a game unless they absolutely have to. So, as anybody who's been around here in this room knows, I have a pretty ironclad rule, and that is if something's already written, I don't read it. And all of you are more than capable of reading as I'm sort of maneuvering through this paper. There's not a lot of text here, but I will take a little bit of time to go through this, 7 numbered and some subsections of particularly number 7. And I'm going to do it pretty quickly, but I just wanted to thank Glenn for the opportunity to participate formally in this one meeting, and then I'm happy to go back to the audience. All right. In fact, I may even do that tonight. The principals are here to, as we've said to each other over the last couple of days, answer your questions. They're not here to be part of the formal presentation, but as they know, I'm always happy to have them be part, even if we didn't necessarily plan that. And the concept of tonight's meeting grew out of your earlier conversations, where the focus tonight would be a little bit on numerics, and I know we said, in fact, Chris was quoted in the most recent minutes saying, you're not about numbers, but to some extent you are about numbers, and that's part of your deliberations. So what Glenn and Andy and I did an hour or so before break, and afternoon of Friday the 18th, was to sit down and just talk about, sort of, the question was how could the three of us, Glenn delegated it to me and Andy, and I volunteered to put this paper together, working with Andy, how could the three of us be most helpful to you as you move on to the early 2016 portion of your deliberations? So that's really what number one is saying, and of course the agenda item tonight has the title, what would 4 schools look like in the district? And obviously if we're talking about 4 schools, then we're talking about 5 possible options of 4 schools. Okay? So that's what item number 1 is. There are a lot of ways of looking at enrollments. You know from the delinquent report that basically they're looking at a K through 6 configuration and total number of students somewhere in the 1,300s. It gets to low 1,400s, but as Andy said, he could remind you that higher number probably is driven by one particular assumption that they made. So for want of a better number, we just picked the present year. So that's 2015-16, 1,328 students rounded, and just made it 1,325. You'll see why in a minute if you haven't already figured it out. So low 1,300s is the number that we're looking at. We did not have sort of a sidebar and say, well, yeah, there could be a 6 through 8 middle school. That's possible, in which case you can easily do the subtraction of 185 students. But at this point, we're looking at 7 grades. Actually, it's really 8, sort of 7.5 grades, because we do have a TK program, right? And that's not exactly, it's not really in here as a separate entity, but it's certainly something that when the time comes for the decision on what to do with our facilities would be part of the dialogue. Yet we don't know, and this came up at this table, Chris actually raised it, being intimately involved in the conversation with TK, that it's just as likely that TK would be all in one place, all in one school, or 2 schools, as opposed to 5 schools, or 4 schools. So that's not really accounted for, but it would not have a large impact. Number 3, and this is critical, I think, just absolutely critical, depending on what you talk about in terms of potentially closing one of the large elementary schools in particular, and you could spend a lot of time and have a lot of fun trying to figure out what would happen if school A that has 300 students or so to mid 400s with X number of intra-district students and Y number of inter-district students, what would happen if you closed one of the big schools and then had to figure out how to put, and you'll see, 1,100 students in 2 other schools, and how would you do that when you're taking into consideration families who live there, intra-district and inter-district? And then what priorities would you establish in terms of giving people initial, secondary, or tertiary access to those schools? Okay? So at this point, what we decided to do, since that would be very time-consuming and might take you down a path that would not be that helpful for tonight, was just to assume that the present conditions would continue to exist. So what that really means is, as you look at the charts that are attached, it would mean that all, since we're using 15-16 numbers, all present intra-district and inter-district students who are in those schools, all 5 schools, would continue as is, except obviously for the school that's closed. Okay? So we would be accommodating 141 inter-district kids. Okay? And you can do the math on that also, particularly with state revenues increasing now. For every student we wouldn't be able to accommodate inter-district, we would be losing by then, call it $10,000 a student. Okay? So that's a very important part of our budget. Just, as I say, just saying, that's an important issue that I thought deserved a note at the end, which is actually now on the back page. On the back of page, on the flip side of the page with all the information on it. Okay? So number 4, Just reminding everybody that the total enrollment is a combination of approximately 1,300 what we would call regular education students and about 30 or so special education students who are in a separate environment. Right? We have many more students who receive special education services, bless you, than these 32, but these 32 are in greater need of intensive, focused special education services. Therefore, they're in 4 locations. 2 at Miners Oaks, 1 at Miramati, and 9, and then 1 at Topa Topa. So that's how they are configured. The next piece was purely subjective, and that is number 5. We talked a lot about what would constitute a large elementary school in this district. And Cheryl came from a school, White Oak Elementary School, with 600 plus elementary students, K through 6. Although 6 was a little different, right? It wasn't quite exactly the same as the other 6 grades, but predominantly a full 6th grade and certainly full K through 5. And so she can speak to what that is like. But we decided that with Ojai being smaller, certainly in the Simi Valley, that 550 might make sense, at least for analytical purposes, to put a cap on a 7th grade, or if you put TK in there, 7+ grade elementary school. And you can see, and you can do the numbers, if you have 25 students per grade, per class, as was the case with Malinka, then you would have, again, separate from TK, 6 grades of 3 classes each, and 1 grade of 4 classes. Right? So 6 75s and a 100. The issue that surrounds the 550 goes to the space utilization material, which is in the second attachment that you have. And again, this is where the principals can speak tonight and in upcoming meetings eloquently about, for example, if we move from, even at Topa Topa, from 15, 16, 17 regular classrooms used to the configuration that we're talking about here, where you have, now remember, the class sizes are being driven down here, so we could know that you would have enough space. But if you have 25 students per grade and you have 550 students, then you have 22 classrooms, right? Needed, regular classrooms, before you get to special ed, before you get to art, before you get to pull-out, anything else. So we have to look at that, and you can see that the total number of classrooms in the 3 large schools that number is larger than 22, but you start getting pressed up against that total number of 25, 26, 27. There's not a lot of extra space there if, in fact, you have 25 students per class. Okay? But that only really pertains as a challenge if you're closing one of the 3 large schools. And you're creating then 2 large schools, or present large school, and then you're creating 2 actually pretty large schools of 550. So ultimately, as I said, the decision would have to be made as to, if you had 2 and not 3 of our large schools used, what would the utilization of those schools look like? Okay? And how much elbow room would you not have compared to now? And that's one of the reasons why when Andy and I sat down with Larry Frickshaw from Malinka, that was one of the reasons, the main reason why I said, just hold those 5 classrooms open. Right? Because they could have been assigned to things, or just said, somehow subsumed into the total. I said, just put a line there of 5 classrooms, 125 students, so that when this committee came together, you could sort of see what would happen if you needed them. So that's number 5. Number 6, I already talked about. We chose 25 students per class across the whole district. Obviously, the sizes would be different depending on the age of the students, but just as a mean, 25 is a good number. It happens to be the same as Malinka. You can see where we are now. We're in the 28 to 29 range, which thankfully is about a student or 2 or 3 less than we've been in the last 4 or 5 years. And actually, I'm better than 28.6 when you add in the hours program. But that's the reason that we chose 25. And all this came from the meeting among the 3 of us. I didn't just conjure this up on New Year's. Okay, and so then, as you look through number 7, this is what we talked about, and that is the 550 as an analytical maximum for the 3 large schools. 175 at San Antonio, because truly they have 1 additional classroom now that could be used. We have 6 used now, it could be 7. So now that gets you to the 175 number. And Summit is in that flex point of where we are now. Actually 50 is 10 or so students, 8 to 10 students more than we have now, but we have had mid-70s back 3-4 years ago. And so conceivably it could be 2 or 3, and if you look at the Blinker report, you'll see that there are 4 classrooms identified. Right? There would be no reason to believe that Summit could garner 100 students. It could garner the 75 again if somehow there were a program to draw the same kind of numbers that we had 3-4 years ago in Santa Paula, but I've talked a little bit about the difference. What Santa Paula is different now in terms of the school district configuration and rules and regulations than it was in 2010-11, but it's not inconceivable. So that's why the 2 different numbers apply at the beginning of number 7, albeit as we went down we used 50, but it actually wouldn't really matter. You could have given 75, it still works. So as you look then, I'm not going to go over everything, but you can see the concept here in A, B, C, D, and E was to give you a look at 5 different 4-school configurations closing 1 school, and hopefully if my math is right, and we change the numbers a lot, but in general, I hope my math is right, that those 4 totalities are 1325. And that's what then we would look like. And then the note at the end is just to remind you about what I said back at the end of number 3, and that is to keep in mind the importance, at least in my opinion, the importance for 2 different reasons of intra and inter-district enrollment in Ojai. Intra is just because it's part of who we are. We're an internal district choice district. That's different from district of choice. It's just internal choice. Most school districts have that. In California, not in the whole country, but California. And so that's really important. And you know, almost a third of our district, that's why I put it there, almost a third of our K through 6 students go to a school other than in the attendance area where they live.
Right, across town.
You bet. Some cross town, some next door, but in any case, different than where they would go if you had a rule that you must go to school where you live. And then, as I said before, 11% of our total 1,328 students come from out of district, 90% or so, plus, from some portions of Ventura, typically Oak Creek. So that's the, I hope that represents what we talked about.
Yeah.
Fair? Okay.
So far, so
And you see the attachment, the staple. This is a chart you've received before. I'm not sure how much time you've given to it, but you can certainly see the composition of schools with the impact of intra and inter-district, where the students go if they don't live in the attendance area, and you could draw your own conclusions about that. We've talked many times, San Antonio being the real super outlier, and always has been. And I'm sure I said from the audience at one point that whether San Antonio had 120 students, which we've had since I've been here, or almost 200 students since I've been here, there's about a 3-to-1 ratio of external and internal from where you live. So about 2/3, I guess 3-to-1, I'm sorry. So 2/3 of the students live outside the attendance area and always have, depending on the size of the school. So that's that. The other document is the combination of all the tables from the Galincha report. Tables, this one just on white paper, 3 through 14, and I referred to some of those numbers in the last few minutes, 15, 20 minutes. The last one, table 14, gives you 4 different looks at what the total number of seats might be needed to accommodate our students, and you can see by any measure, there certainly are well more than 1,325 seats available. And finally, I thought it might be interesting to give you this map so that at some point, I don't know if it's tonight, but at some point, if you ever want to talk about drawing different lines and creating different configurations of attendance areas, you can get a sense of what that might be. And Malinka, when they came in to do our study, they have a metric, and they have some data analysis where you can actually ask them, if you move these streets to this elementary attendance area, what would the number be? Right? So they have all those addresses available to plug in.
Hey, who draws these lines?
Somebody about 50 years ago, probably.
Okay.
I really,
Well, what body would do that?
this one, I mean, who does it?
If they were to change these, what would be the
school board.
procedure?
The school board.
Okay.
Yeah, the school board. Yeah, they have, the school board has the authority to change internal district lines. When you start talking about changing lines between districts, then the county gets involved.
So would it make any difference because they do have a
I don't
choice?
mean, by the way, I'm just saying, I don't mean to slight some of it, it was just, we needed a really big map.
What's your question, Mary Ann?
I'm sorry.
Does it make a difference where the lines are since they have choice?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, only though, but way less than it means in certainly other places I've
Other
been.
school districts,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes, in the sense that, and principals know this, we talk about this during the year, but certainly in August, when we're trying to create equity and try to respond to people's requests to go to the school to which they want to go, we do give preference to people who live in the attendance area. So, but nowhere near as powerfully, Mary Ann, as it would be in some other places.
That was my question. If indeed the school board votes to go to 4 schools, will this then become the rule? As we will have to, all of a sudden, we're down to 4 schools? Will this be the rule, or will there be a process that didn't exist before for intra-district movement? Do you foresee that perhaps happening?
That's a good question, Linda. I guess I would start out assuming that we would try to hold on to the present concept. I just know how many hours go into the construction of each school's population, and in many cases, many grades in each school, and even classes in each school. I got a call from Teresa today about somebody moving in. We have room here, we have room at San Antonio, we don't have room in another school, okay, that kind of thing. So we're constantly making those adjustments. So I think the answer at this juncture, we would assume, is the present rules for intra-district movement would apply, but they're pretty fungible.
Right.
I mean, there isn't, I couldn't pull out a piece of paper and say, here's exactly how we determine whether an intra-district request will be accepted or not.
Because we're looking at potentially all of a sudden, at least 120 students, is that correct? Possibly be, peppered throughout the other 4 schools. And, maybe that's something that the board should consider, putting a process in place.
Well, you'll talk tonight and after tonight, I'm sure, about, once you examine a little bit more which one of the 5 or which more than one of the 5 of the options you'd like to continue to look at, then we can start drilling down and saying, if we did this,
Then this.
then how could you actually implement it? Right, so for example, if you said, and we didn't do that tonight, and we started talking about that yesterday, and Andy could see my blood pressure was going up, so I decided to just forget it, and then we did it this way. But if you said, at the February 7-11 committee meeting, we'd like the 2 of us to take our best shot at looking at, for example, option B. We close Miramonte, okay? And in order to make that happen, what would the likely to get to your point, I think, what would the likely distribution of students be? Right? Well, we already know that you would absolutely have to house 1,100 students or so between Miners Oaks and Topatopa, right? Because you can only house 225 or maybe 250 between Summit and San Antonio. And we're using 1325 as the total. I mean, it could be more, it could be less, but 1325 is the number you're looking at, so you need 1,100 other seats. So in order to do that, you're going to have to move boundary lines and look at intra-district and inter-district. What would happen, for example, in Miramonte, you just picked that one because it's the hardest. You know, it has the largest number of inter-district students, right? So if you don't have Miramonte, right, many of those who go to many Oakview, let's say with Oakview, students certainly would choose Miners Oaks, but some wouldn't, right? And now you have two places to go. They had two places to go, Miners Oaks and Miramonte. If they just have one, how many would go all the way, being facetious,
But
all the way to Topatopa?
Yeah, but seriously, coming through town?
I know.
I think it's a, yeah.
I understand. Traffic is relative, but anyhow, but you're right, in the morning, it actually is a challenge.
Yeah.
But, you know, we have, as, you know, Steve's pointed out, we have a number of people coming from down in that area, or Miramonte, you know,
West,
all the way to San Antonio.
I have a question in that respect, and if one, per se, one of the school closes, then the school district will provide more transportation for those kids
Great
who
question.
are traveling from
Great
one side
question.
to
We
the other.
have, you know, a limit that you have to meet in order to get transportation to a school. We have very small population of elementary kids who get transportation, right? We only have 150 total students, K-12, right? And there's about 150, isn't it?
150 to 200.
Okay. Under 200. So we're talking already about a small percentage of our, less than 10%. Whereas in some districts that are all spread out, you know, you have a lot of buses all over the place. So we would, school board would have to look at that. Would have to look at that and make some, I would bet make some adjustments.
Because I remember that before there were more options for kids who needed transportation, but because of the budget cuts and stuff
Yes.
like that, they make a very smaller area where they can, or, you know, just the people who are very, very far away.
Right?
And then they have to be so many miles to be able to get transportation. So in an option of closing something, then I think the school district will really have to do something about it, and then that will probably cut a little bit of the traffic in the mornings or in the afternoon.
Reduce the cars, increase the cost.
City
to
will
the
love you.
district.
Yeah.
Yeah.
City will love you.
Yeah, I know.
So
Yes.
those that transportation rule about how many miles or this sort of thing, is that completely discretionary? It's
Yes.
up to the school board?
And our current policy for elementary is 1 mile.
Anything more than 1 mile, there's a
Right.
transport option.
Exactly.
Both directions.
Correct.
And then high school is what?
High school, it's one direction, and it's, let's see, junior high is, Utila has 2 miles, and Nordhoff is, I think, 3.
Okay.
Only two.
Does that also apply to
Yeah.
students that are inter-district transfers? Same rule, so they...
Intra,
Yeah, so if they're,
intra, they need to get there on their own.
That's what okay, that's what I'm asking.
So we're assuming that the only people that are doing inter-district travel or inter-district transfers are the ones whose families can afford or have the means to get them to a district. So intra-district.
Inter, they're on their own.
Or some means, yeah, I mean, right, yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, it is a discretionary.
Right, no, but a family with low means or low incomes and without the ability to get their students halfway across town wouldn't have the
The only
ability.
time that there would be a different rule is if, and this goes back to, you know, the student, where the student lives. If we say, we just don't have any room for you here, right, you have to go over here, then across town, we will move the student across
I see.
town.
Gotcha.
So it
But
only
that's that doesn't happen very often.
Gotcha.
Was that changed at some point because they used to take intra-district students to where they wanted
Am
to
I
go?
missing it? That's right, isn't it? Is there anything we don't? Can you think of?
remember that.
Well, I just recall for Summit, we had students who would have gone to, they lived over, what's the name of the street, Encino.
Yeah.
And they had a bus that brought them to to someone.
That's interesting. Not since I'm here, but you know, we always have interesting creative requests, right, from parents who would like to get on a bus. So they say, well, you already have the bus going from here to here. Is it okay if Johnny gets on the bus and goes to here? And I can't remember when we've said no. As long as we have the bus going, we just can't afford to create, new stops and new routes and all that.
The trolley takes a lot of the kids.
Trolley for sure.
And I know for us, my son would rather take the trolley than have his mom pick him up at junior high, for gosh sakes. But it's $1 a day. Has the school district considered partnering with the city and perhaps getting some grants or some fund? It's not the city, it's the chamber, right?
It's a city.
It's the city?
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah. The trolley's a department of the city.
Because for my family, that's $20 a month, which is not a huge deal, just on the way home, but that might be an option maybe?
Always open to those kinds of things.
Okay.
That just hasn't come up.
Okay.
Back to your earlier comments, did you say the inter-district kids are on their own?
Oh, sure, as are in trust. Inter-district, I mean, if they're coming from, if they're coming outside the district, that's inter.
Yeah.
Okay. Then they're certainly on their own. Intra, they're on their own because it's their request.
Unless coincidentally.
Unless
they also happen to live far enough away.
Or if they live far enough away, sure.
But if the child can be transported to a place, if it's an intra-district transfer, if I'm right, if they can transport the child to a drop-off where the bus picks up, then they will
That's the kind of
accommodate
thing we're happy to
that
do.
child at
We're
that
happy to
point.
do that.
Yeah.
We're happy to do that. And we
See, I'm
had,
not sure that you understood that, because I could see a little, there's,
Try
no,
again,
if you're an intra-district, you don't have busing. If you make a choice to go to another neighborhood school.
Except coincidentally.
Unless it's,
Right.
absolutely, and I can tell you, that doesn't happen very often that we actually do that, but, yeah. But if you choose another school district, or you choose another school boundary, no busing.
It will necessitate, and maybe this is the point you were getting at, we will, if we do close a school, have to redefine these boundaries though, right?
thinking
Isn't
that.
that what you were trying to
Oh,
say?
The district,
Yeah, I mean,
the board will.
Right.
The board
So-
will. And to me, it's a whole, and I'm sorry to jump on
No,
your
it's okay.
comment, but maybe to, put a fine point on it, then we may need to, the school board may need to put processes in place that didn't exist before. And it goes back to what Chris said at the last meeting, it's more than numbers, the community is going to be affected and perhaps they won't accept the closure of a school in a positive way. And therefore, then will they be being told all of a sudden we're not intra-district anymore as much as we used to be? That's my concern because it seems like a slide into a culture that the families aren't used to. In this area, and with this amazing school district. My kids in the state of Washington, we didn't get to pick where they went.
Right, that's what I'm
So
saying.
this is an incredible opportunity, but it's an opportunity that's been unknown for so long, and that's my concern about.
well, exactly.
Yeah.
Right, let's take, I'm trying to pick some examples that maybe aren't as obvious as others by public conversation of where you are, what you're studying. Let's take San Antonio. That's the most obvious one, okay? You have, call it 150 to 175 students there. You know that only 50 or 60 of that group will be living in the San Antonio area. Therefore, you have 100, 120, whatever the right number might be, who have sought before and historically, probably with older brothers and sisters or whatever, came from other schools some geography away, right, to go to San Antonio, right? So now the question is, now, there's a fairly easy answer on this one. What would you have to do, would you change the rules on intra-district because 110 or 100 whatever number of students couldn't be accommodated in San Antonio because it's closed? And the answer is probably not. Okay, because you have 3 large schools open, right? And that's where, some San Antonio students come from Summit, but as you can see, not very many. Okay? So if all of those, and you can look on the little chart, that's what I gave it to you. You could see the impact of just that. If all those students went back to their other 4 schools, but predominantly the 3 large schools, question mark, could they be accommodated? Answer, yes. So the intra-district option
Policy,
would be changed because the school isn't there anymore.
yeah.
Right? But other than that, the concept would still be there.
Okay.
I have a question, and maybe some of the principals can answer this. You spoke about 550 being kind of pushing the limit in terms of comfortableness or usability. It would seem to me that, and this is just theoretical, that would be, like, using a school to its maximum would be actually the most efficient way to use a school. So I'd sort of like to understand what you mean by you'd be pushing the limit, or wouldn't be comfortable, or wouldn't be operating under the best case scenario.
Well, that's why they're here.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad you raised it. So just let me get it started and let me give you a for example, okay? So let's take a look at, let's take a look at Miramonte, because the difference between the way it's being used now and the way it would be used in that scenario is pretty radically different. So to turn to page 2 of 4, okay? Now, I have maybe a one classroom dispute with Delinka's counting, but it's not enough to make a difference. So, Catherine, I hope we're pretty much correct here. 27 locations. Remember, the Miramonte, Mighty Oaks, and Topa are about the same size, give or take, okay? This one happens to be the largest, the 3-by-1 room. So, if you look now, 15, it might be 14, but anyway, 15 of the 27 classrooms are identified, Catherine, as regular classroom use, 1 TK, 14 others, okay. All right, 3 for special education, that could change, but right now it is that. But the reason I picked this is because you have 8 pull-out after-school uses, and I know, in part because you've been there a while, and I know you're creative about using space and have a lot of programs, as do all the other schools, but in this particular case, look at the difference between whatever number you want to pick, 25, 26, 27, and 15, okay? So then, if you just do the math, now if you're 550, and we had to accommodate 550 students with a 25 average, right? That's 22 classrooms, plus a TK maybe. So that's why I said, now that's a leave it, okay? So if you had 550 students instead of your 380, and you had 22 to 23 classrooms used instead of 15 or so, how different would the school be?
Well, since I've been at Miramonte, this is my 23rd year.
Like I said,
I was there when the school was close to, right around 600. So I've been there when it's been a very large school. So since that time, what we have added that we didn't have the opportunity to do before is we have an art track room, we have a PE room, we have a piano lab room, we have an ELD room. So we have all this additional space that wasn't available to us before. And, now that we've had it, of course, when Hank says you have extra empty room, no, nobody would ever admit that we have any extra space at our school, because we do, we make use of it. And it's
Actually, I didn't say that. I said I know you're using it.
So it's a wonderful thing to have. Did we function without it? Yeah, we functioned without all those extra spaces. We have the situation where one of these rooms that we're calling a pull-out room, my second grade teachers have decided that one classroom is not large enough for them. So they have one extra classroom they share between the 2 of them. So would they tell you they could give that room up? No, they wouldn't want to give that room up. But could they give that room up? Absolutely, they could give that room up. So, there's I can see it go both directions.
So you have 8, and what if theoretically it went down to only 3 or 4? Is that still something you could?
Yeah, I do think we could function like that. Would it be beautiful anymore? No, we would definitely lose out a bit, but I think we could function. Yeah.
That's sort of we call that the elementary school's application of Parkinson's law. Right? They're just, people will fill up the space as space is available.
Yeah.
And I think that was the reason I used Miramonte as an example. The gap at Miners Oaks is even bigger, right, between present use, because it's a smaller population, by 90 kids or so. Okay, so that gap is even larger, so I thought Miramonte might be an interesting one to talk about, where the gap at Topa is quite small, and there's almost no gap at San Antonio, and there's a couple of classes at Summit.
That's the gap between current enrollment.
Yeah, right, and what it would look like with 22 classes at 25 each. right?
So are you saying that you're kind of at an ideal, would you argue that? I mean, would you say that you're
Well,
at
you know, it's interesting, having been there when the school was around 600, it was a very busy campus. There was a lot of moving pieces to it. I would say that when you have a smaller campus, you have more connections with students, that's for sure. You know more of the kids by name, you know the families better. So there's that trade-off there.
But when you were young on a big campus, you didn't know what you didn't know.
Right. Yeah.
That is part of
But
it.
I think if you want to look at sort of an idealized education, you're including art, you're including music, you're making room for all that. I think that's significant. And it seems to be there's a balance in some ways, like an equitability. Again, we're talking about each school being kind of equitable. It's like,
Well, we did have, the difference is now we have art in an art room. We had art in our classrooms before.
Yeah.
So it's not that things didn't happen, it was a different configuration. Yeah.
Do you mean, take a fourth grade class, when it's time to do art, everybody in the fourth grade classroom does art, or they all pick up and move to a different classroom to do art?
Now that we have the space, we have a room that is an art studio, and we take the kids into that classroom. So the tables are set up so that it's much more conducive to art than a classroom that has, pencil box on the
But it is the whole
the
class
teacher has to
moves.
wheel all her stuff, which,
No, in the art studio, everything's already set up. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, when you started 20 years ago, were there more art and music programs than there are now, or is it about the same?
No, I would say it was probably about the same. It was just more crowded.
Right.
You did art and you had bigger messes in your room you had to deal with. Music, most of it took place in the multipurpose room instead of being in a music classroom. And so that cut down on the use of the multipurpose room. So teachers had to make other arrangements if they wanted to use a larger room. So it's just different.
Melanie, one of the challenges, I think one of the biggest challenges this committee has is the next step beyond your question. Okay, so here. So we have, I'll just give you some round numbers now. In the high 300s in Miramonte, actually 375 or so regular classroom students, another few in that one special education class. Okay, so that's present scenario. Now let's add 170 students or so. And by the way, remember, we're also driving down the average class size. So, when I say 22, it could be 20, right? But it's way more than what we have now.
would that be something that actually happens? Would that actually happen? The driving down of the class sizes?
Well, it would be ideal. We'd like to do it. I mean, it was about that, give or take, when I came here 7 years ago, because the K through 3 average is about 20, and the 4 through 6 average is about 28.
I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is, so part of our considerations would be that it would impact class size quite possibly.
Well, I don't think that your decision would impact class size much, because we're not talking about saving a lot of money depending on what you do.
Okay.
There's some money involved. We also have no clue how many dollars we're going to have.
Right.
I mean, it's so hypothetical. But anyway, where I was going was this. So now you hear, what would Miramonte be like with 5 or 6 or whatever more classrooms used? You wouldn't be able to do this in a discrete location compared to being in the classrooms. Okay. So that's one side of the trade-off. The other side of the trade-off is what we talked about maybe 2 meetings ago, and I was back there. And Steve asked the question, what's the ideal size? Right? Okay. And this is sort of why we picked 550, because remember I said, at a minimum, in my opinion, if we just started from scratch, I remember I was talking with you too, Melanie, about this. If you start from scratch, in my opinion, academically, ideally, you would want 3 or 4 classes per grade in a school. Okay? Now, I can tell you how many times in 7 years we've had that since I've been here. Once. 6th grade, was it last year, Cheryl? 2 years ago. 2 years ago. It was the year before you came. We had 96 graders.
Last year.
Was it last year? Okay, last year, okay. Last year, Topa, we had 90, and it was 3 discrete classes, right? They weren't, okay, that's one time. So we had 90 330s. Even now, the biggest single grade we have across the school district is also a Topa, not surprisingly, 79 but there are 2 classes of 30 and 31, and one that's a combination 5-6 class, right? So, anyway, there you go. So where are you putting your chips?
Yeah.
Okay, where are you putting your chips? If you have more classes, I don't have to finish the sentence, you know the answer. If you have more total classes, you have more classes per grade, and you have the advantages of that.
I have a question about something that maybe is a little outside of our committee's purview, but at our first meeting, we were informed that Chaparral could be moved, and it could be at Miramonte or Miners Oaks. And that obviously would have a major effect on a recommendation of the committee. Is that something that we should be trying to figure in? Can you give us some input on the likelihood of that?
You know, David, I remember the conversation, I remember that. And we talked about, does Chaparral, well, it's sort of tied into what might be the future of this area. Okay. I would suggest to you that the answer to what might happen to this area is impossible to conclude. Okay, and I wouldn't spend any time on it. Okay, now, you might write a note or two and say, well, our job is to figure out what to do with the K-6 population. And depending on what decision the board makes, for example, if all 3 of the large elementary schools are retained, then there would be several choices, given the population we're looking at, to place Chaparral at any one of the 3. More likely Miners Oaks or Miramonte, because Topa's already large. So if you didn't mess with the population boundaries and all that, if you were to go to an elementary school place, Miners Oaks and Miramonte would be the most logical. How many classrooms? 4, 5, but certainly nowhere near the impact of a 550 elementary school. Okay.
4 or 5 classrooms to accommodate Chaparral.
That's all. We only have 60 students, basically. It's 3 classrooms plus a couple of others. Okay, and an office, and it's not big. It's a very small school. So, you're right. We also talked about the fact that Chaparral doesn't have to be at a school site. Right? It wasn't at some point in time.
It has not.
It was next to the library.
At least
It
once
was in the
not
city.
in the past.
It was in the city. You could run Chaparral out of a nice office building for some time. Now, it would cost more because we don't own the property already, but you could do that. Okay?
I actually, in my opinion, I wouldn't agree with Chaparral in any of the elementary school campuses. Just because if you go by 8 o'clock, 8:30, kids are smoking and just having the sweet old time walking on the street. And in my opinion, if all the kids are subjected to that, then they're going to think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I didn't say it was ideal. I said you could house it.
Yes.
You could house it. Yeah, believe me, there would be some issues to address.
But if that's,
I had just something to speak to what Melanie was saying and maybe closing the gap on it. So Catherine, what I'm hearing you say is, although it was doable, you said you were at Miramonte when there were 600, although it was doable, and both environments probably had their different benefits and liabilities. Would you say that the culture changed? It sounds like you're saying that the culture, I can know that there's more community in a smaller.
I think that as the numbers grow, the connections with all the families, with each other, and the staff on working with the children, you just don't know the kids as well. So I think that just happens naturally. In any organization, the bigger the organization is, the fewer people you're going to actually get to know in that. So,
Right.
you
And
know.
for the other principals here tonight, would you all kind of agree with that statement, that if you've been with a larger organization or a larger school, it just presents new challenges perhaps in communication?
I can't say that. White Oak had 600 when I was there. One of the things that was special about that school, it mostly, even though we did intra-district transfers in CME, it mostly had its neighborhood kids for the most part. And I would say it was a very tight-knit community school for having 600 people. I feel like the parents knew each other, the teachers knew the parents and the kids. There was a lot of generations of kids and families being at the school. I mean, teachers there were already on grandchildren.
Like
having
here.
taught yeah, like here. So, there was a lot of history to it that made it able to be a tight-knit school community, even though it had 600 students. So I think some of those factors play into it. If people are driving all over town, that makes it harder for people to be close with each other. So I think that could happen if you had 400 or 600, just depending on your population of people. But definitely, I have been on a campus where it absolutely works. We had 550 at TOPA last year. So I would say it was a very close-knit school. At 500 this year, it still is. I can't say that I've seen a huge difference with any of those 50, marker points. I don't know if I can speak to any more than that, but I
You're at
think-
500?
Well, it's 450.
Oh, I take that back, sorry.
450 and 500. It's 450 and 500.
I was at White Oak, it was at 600.
Right, yeah.
When I left there, it was 550.
There you go.
Then it was 5 at TOPA, now I'm at 450. That
But, let's, now, as long as we have the floor, could you put some richness to this sort of numerical answer that I gave to Steve? And I mean, I did talk about the relationships built among 3 or 4 teachers. And I mean, you lived it as a principal. What's that like?
I think that there is some really nice collaboration that can happen when you have 3 and 4 teachers that work at a grade level. So at White Oak, we had at least several grades that had 4 teachers, and then the rest with 3 teachers. We had a leadership team, which was neat. So a teacher from each grade level met with me and then went back out and was sort of the team leader among their grade level. And I sort of came to TOPA and thought, well, you should try that. But then it really didn't work because there's only 2 teachers per grade. So it just made more sense to meet with everybody. But you get to sort of build some leadership there when you have that kind of a configuration. And I think that people took pride as teachers going back and then being the leader among their teacher group at that grade level. We did data teams there, and that is obviously much easier to come by when you have 3 or 4 people that are sharing data and then making comparisons. It's really hard to do that with 2 and pretty impossible to do that with 1 teacher. So there are some nice pieces that happen when you have a larger
And
school.
you've got teachers that have certain strengths and they can bring that to that grade level too and become, the mentor for those teachers.
Absolutely. We had one that was a sort of a literacy expert, and she brought that to her team. So there's neat pieces that get to be shared when you have colleagues at the
We
same
also
grade.
talked about, when you all come together in the spring with the teachers of the lower grade, whatever that grade is, and now you're making placements in the next year, right? If you have 1.5 teachers, right, so you have a full grade, just one grade of students for 1 teacher, and then the other teacher has a combination class. You don't have a whole lot of choices to be able to make when you have a certain learning style and a certain teaching style, right?
Yeah.
They're like, you can't avoid
Right.
something, right? Okay, so we talked a little bit about that too, right? Is that a fair issue? Okay, so-
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is the basis you're talking about for ideally 3 or 4.
3 or 4, I mean, we could have put in, 4 of everyone, in which case we would have had 700 kids. Well, no, that's, remember.
We don't have the classrooms for that.
No, we don't. We didn't have that. We could have pushed it a little bit more, but this we felt was a maximum. It also doesn't have to be 550, it could be 525, 500, whatever totality of all those seats ends up at 1325 or 1350 or whatever is needed in that period of time.
May I also interject that when what Cheryl said with those teams, what you also have is opportunities we had a huge hiring class this year, right? We had more new teachers this year.
Immense.
And we know that in education, retention is a huge deal with keeping new teachers. If you have those teams built in and have that mentorship built into a program with, say, 550 students and 3 or 4 person teacher teams, you're going to kind of foster the new talent and encourage them to stay in a district that historically is lower paying right now than many districts in the county. So we might want to. I mean, that's just one aspect coming from the union representative.
One of the things I would like to share too, along the same lines of what Cheryl was saying, is academically with the kids, we've had a lot of when we did have more students, we had more opportunities to do some more instructional level grouping of where kids meeting their needs where they were academically and doing some flexible grouping and the larger hopefully you've got a very large group of kids that are at grade level or above, and they can be in a larger class of kids where there's a group of kids that are maybe at grade level or maybe struggling a bit. You can put them in a smaller group of a smaller classroom setting for language arts and math. And we do some of that right now at Miramonte, but we certainly, when we were larger, we could do more of an RTI model to where our most needy kids could have a smaller group of
You explain the acronym.
RTR. It's called response to intervention, so it's a pyramid where, you've got your basic universal program, which is all of your students, and then you have your next step, which would be your intervention, and then you have a more intensive need group of students that require more intervention time. And so, of course, you want your smallest group of students to be in that intervention group that provides more strategic teaching. For instance, if you've got a fourth grader that's reading at second grade level, it's going to be very difficult to do that in a large full class, so you put them in a smaller
So I'll
group.
give an example, because at White Oak, we had, in most of our grade levels, we were able to do this, but for example, our second grade level had 4 classes. So for a half an hour of the school day, they regrouped every single kid in second grade into homogeneous groups, so you could give enrichment to the students that were working above grade level, and you could do a little bit of reteaching for the kids at grade level, and then you could make a small group and really target those kids with some strategies. So that's really difficult to do when you only have 2 or 1 teacher at a grade level at a site.
And you have to keep reshuffling the pieces as you go from topic to topic, because the math literacy isn't going to be the same as EL.
Yeah.
In most cases, you're right.
See, one of the main areas of emphasis of this hourly support program, which has grown from 100,000 well close to 200,000 in the last 4 years, is to try to create in our setting more of what they're talking about. Okay, so in any one of the schools, you'll see that group of, the example I've used many times is you have 60 students, 2 teachers, but for some part of the day, you have 60 students with 3 teachers. And when they regroup, you don't necessarily, in fact, most of the time, you don't see 3 20s, right?
Right.
I mean, you'll see a 25, a 25, and a 10, or a 23, a 22, and a 15, right? And so that, we're sort of doing that, we're doing that, particularly when the third person is a certificated teacher. And what the program has evolved from about a 60-40 split first year, certificated to classified, it's much more now like about 80-20. So we don't have as many hours in the program because you pay more for a certificated person per hour than you do for a classified, right? Almost 2-to-1 ratio. But you can take that group of 15 students out of 60 and put those 15 in a separate environment, completely separate environment, with a certificated teacher and meet state guidelines. Whereas if the person might be quite talented but isn't certificated, technically that person is not supposed to be in a discrete environment with students.
Can I say something? Would it be possible, I know at Topa and at Miramonte, at least in the upper grades, they often would have, and maybe Merv, you can address this too as a teacher, like one teacher teaching social studies at that grade level, rather than all 3 teachers developing a plan of social studies.
I can tell you that the Miramonte upper grade team has been dreaming of doing that for a long time, but we've just never had the right number of teachers to do that, because then you can become a specialist. And if you take what's happening this year with math as an example, you've got teachers and in English language arts with all the new Common Core standards, you've got them all trying to be specialists in all these different areas right now, and it's a real challenge at the elementary level for an elementary school teacher. I know that at Miners Oaks, I can speak to this because my husband's one of the teachers. In 6th grade, one of the teachers is teaching all of the math, and one is teaching all of the language arts. In my upper grade, I have teachers that will do all the science for grade level, while the other teacher does all the social studies for the grade level. And again, it's reducing the areas they have to become experts in, and it's reducing the amount of prep they're doing, because now they're not prepping for 4 subjects, they're prepping for 2 subjects. So I know it's been very popular with the teachers to be able to do that.
And in both of those settings, Miners Oaks and Miramonte 6th grade, they're almost identical, right? About 34 classes in about 30, right? But again, 2 teachers. How many configurations of specialties, can you have with 2 teachers? Basically 2. right? Because you have 4 academic areas, I mean, give or take. 4 academic areas you need to cover, math, science, social studies, and language arts. So somehow, probably someone's going to teach 2, or all.
Well, and the other nice thing is that if you have, even if you're doing instructional level grouping for language arts and math, and you do more of a heterogeneous grouping for science and social studies, you can split some kids up that maybe are not the best together in a classroom environment too. So it gives you a lot of options.
Socially as well as academically.
So
Okay.
There's a lot of options.
Well, that actually, yeah, right, that's a sort of a during the year example of what I was saying about creating classes, right? So if you have 3 or 4 places to put 120 students or 100 students, 175 students.
A lot more possibilities.
You have more possibilities when you construct the classes. Now the year starts, right, and you say, whoa, wait a minute, we need to reshuffle here a little bit. Well, you can't reshuffle very much if you have 1.5 classes, or 1,
Right.
really 2 doesn't need to that much. So, Melanie, that's sort of hopefully an interesting half hour or so. The other side of the equation of being larger, where you're pushing your facilities limits, right? Do you know how many classrooms you've had at White Oak? What did you have?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, had to
If
be
you give
well
me a
more-
second, I'll think
Had
about
to be
it.
well more than 30, because you had all those, you had 7 grades, because I know you had 6th grade there too.
I had a TK.
Yeah, TK, it had to be well over 30. Anyway, it was a big school, but she'll figure it out. But in any case,
I'll figure it out.
anyway, the point is that while our facilities are good size, and we did have 600 kids.
We have 30.
Did you have 30? Okay, you must have filled everything up pretty much. with
No,
regular classrooms.
32.
Even so.
32.
You must have filled most of them with regular classrooms. So, we could give you other information, but that's the academic advantage side
To the 500,
to the trade-off.
That's what I was going to ask. Is it a trade-off? So you don't need, so when you do these groupings and you would not need to utilize necessarily extra space. That would be changing between classrooms and things like that. So if you
saw
lose
what
the
happens,
rooms,
yeah,
you
even
can
right
still
now,
do.
The kids are carrying all their stuff from
Okay.
classroom to classroom.
But there is an upside, is what you're saying, to the possibility of losing the rooms. The upside would be this academic.
I do. I think, like Hank said, there's a sweet spot where you've got a certain number of teachers at a grade level, and that's what that's the beautiful thing is for students at a grade level.
I appreciate what Merv said. Not being a teacher myself, I don't really see, as a parent, the collaboration that happens and the capturing the new generation of teachers and making sure that they have mentors. That speaks to having that collaboration and that groupings and multiple teachers at each grade level, so thank you for that.
Once again, the more teachers you have per grade level, the easier it's going to be to mentor a new teacher.
Yeah, exactly.
And I actually, sorry, I don't know, but my sister-in-law started teaching in Simi 10 years ago or so, which is right before, a lot of the cuts came across the entire state. So I think her first 7 years teaching, she taught 5 different grades and was learning a new curriculum every single year. And while she's a terrific teacher every one of those years, definitely it was a challenge to be learning something new every single year with 1 to 1.5 to 2 classes per grade, or at at the 2 smaller schools even less than that. Is there a higher frequency of teachers having to, 1 year be doing a 2-3 combo, the next year they're only doing 2 or moving around like that, or are we able to avoid that?
Yeah, I'll speak to that. Our teachers sort of, every year they get a survey. What grade level do you want to teach next year? And inevitably, they all want to teach the exact same level they're teaching, and they don't want a combination either way. And so what we've done is we trade off. If you had the combo last year, then next year you don't get the combination class. And so we try to make it equitable that way. But because we do hire so many hourly teachers now, we've done, I think, a pretty good job across the district of eliminating a lot of the combination classes with these hourly teachers. And so even if on paper you have a combination class, you may still only have your combination kids for a half an hour to an hour a day where you have all of them together because they're all split up.
I looked at these charts now every year. I think it'd be fair. It would not be fair to say that if you compare years 1, 2, and 3, assuming all the same teachers are there, Okay, so we're not replacing a third of the teachers. Among those 3 years, I would say a majority, not 80%, but a majority are in the same grades over those 3 years, or at least 2 of those 3 years. So it's pretty rare that you'd be moving. Now, it's more of a challenge at San Antonio sometimes, particularly if you're getting new people, right, because then you have to sort of move around a little bit. But in general, I think the stability is pretty good. I thought one of the comment that Bert made was really interesting because, and I can think of a high school situation, which I won't go there, but there are great advantages to having, the senior member of the junior year English group, become a mentor for that new teacher coming in. In our case, if you have a new teacher coming into a grade, which typically will have 2 teachers, and the reason why that person's coming in from out of the district is because if one of the 2 retired. Take this in the spirit in which it's said, you might not actually want that other remaining teacher being the mentor. You know what I'm saying? And it's not because that person isn't a really good teacher, it's just some very good teachers are not great mentors. They have their own style, right? You don't necessarily want, I'll pick a number, the 27-year-old being mentored by the great 52-year-old, right? But if you have another person, the third person in that 3-person configuration, so you have 2 people staying, not just one, after someone retired. If you have another option, right, who also could be 52 years old, by the way, that person might have, there's no ageism going on here. The fact is that person might be a much better mentor.
No, I agree. The more opportunities there are to pick your mentors. I know most of you guys know Greg Lapine. He's the one that took me under the wing when I was doing student teaching at Topa 6 or 7 years ago. And I looked to him and he's had a rough day. So those mentors are what keep new teachers. Research will show you that if new teachers can make a connection with a mentor, that they are much more likely to stick with the profession over the long run. And I think with bigger grade level teams, I think you foster that kind of, you give the district more opportunities to form those relationships. But something else I'd like to go back to when Kathy White was talking about the RTI program for the intensive interventions for students that are falling behind grade level. That's something also we should also consider when we know that as a district we have a much higher percentage of students with IEPs and special education than other districts in the county. I'm wondering if it were in the cards 10 years ago, if we were able to apply those specific targeted interventions, if maybe we would have caught a few kids that had fallen behind before they were needing the most expensive intervention, which is an IEP. And I'm a special education teacher, so I have a job partly because of high percentage, so I'm not saying that, but
somewhat ironic,
right? No, but also, we're in it for the kids, so I'm wondering if that's the opportunity for RTI comes with bigger schools, if maybe we can lower the percentage of students that have IEPs.
Are there statistics or studies on that you know of?
On which part of what
when you have bigger schools, you have greater opportunities for intervention, early intervention?
There's absolutely no question about it. You wouldn't need to do a study. I think you were asking, you were the one who asked on it, for those of us who've been in bigger organizations, right? There are absolute advantages of being in a district of 2,600, and there are absolute advantages of being in a district of 12,000. I've lived in both, and I can tell you that let's just forget where I've been. How about Ventura, okay? So there are 17,000 students. They have a demographic very much like ours, if not a little more challenging, okay? And just and they don't spend any more money than we do per student. That's interesting too. They don't, okay? But the mere fact that you can spread your resources, even if it's the same per student, across 17,000 students and 20 plus schools, you have an infrastructure in each school, in their case K5, 6, 8, 9, 12. When you go back to high school for a minute, when you have a 2,200 student high school, there are all kinds of things that you can do that you can't do here. Okay, same thing in elementary school. When we were doing the 6th grade study, we brought the team from the middle school, actually 2 middle schools. One was over 1,000, the other was about 800. And our people who were on that committee were sitting there listening to this array of things that they could do, including full-time counselors in the middle school that we could never imagine doing, because you can't afford to do that, right? You have to hire your teachers, and then there's not much else that you can afford. So that's a long way of saying yes.
Okay.
Can I ask you guys directly, the four principals? Do you guys organically agree with what that argument that we might be able to offer better academic opportunities if we went down a school and had 550, and one of these scenarios here?
A, B, C, or D.
Is that sort of, are you guys in organic agreement with that?
I think that the benefit to the teachers of what we're discussing here is a very valid argument. I think it's the strongest argument. I think that the intervention that you can offer kids is a very valuable argument. You can't do it in smaller schools, I don't think, or I don't think it goes as well. I think there's one piece that's missing that I couldn't wholeheartedly say I totally agree or I'm totally on one side. And that is, I do think that every kid is unique and every kid fits in a school uniquely. So, for example, I'll go back to, it applies here too, but in CME, for example, we had 21 elementary schools and inter-district transfers, and the parents used to come to say to me, well, what makes your school better than another? And I would say, you know what, we really actually have quite a bit in common. All 21 of us meet regularly and we offer a lot of the same things. So I think what you're gonna find is when you walk on a campus, you're gonna know. You're gonna know, it's gonna feel a certain way. And I think that's what I hear from our parents in our community, that the campus feels a certain way when you walk on Topa, and it feels a slightly different way when you walk on San Antonio and the other three. So I think that's the one little piece that, you know, when you think about all of it, I don't know that we're weighing that little piece in. But the other pieces are absolutely true. It would benefit, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, although I think the first three that he laid out here, you would still have your two small school opportunities. So you kind of, it seems to me, still meet
Possibly
a lot of those
a lot of needs.
Culturally.
So you might take those pieces into consideration.
Yeah.
But I absolutely think that you can offer better intervention at a bigger school and better collegial opportunities at a bigger school.
And it seems like you all sort of agree with that idea.
Thank you.
It's really.
And so what about the small schools then, Teresa? You know, what about?
Well, what's going on in my mind when I listen to Cheryl, it's very true that some of the programs that you can offer with a bigger school are true, with the RTI, et cetera. And with the opportunity for professional development or collaboration among the teachers. So what I hear from the teachers are that they recognize that. I'm speaking specifically San Antonio. They recognize that they don't have the collaborative opportunities with the grade level peer, but they're okay with that because they like the smaller school environment.
Yeah.
So it's a trade-off. And with the students, you know, whatever environment teachers find themselves in, they still strive to do the differentiation for each student. So it just looks different. So where it's very apparent, where you can mix and match the numbers with the large schools and say, okay, we're going to get these 90 sixth graders and we'll split them out. They still do that with the smaller schools. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, is your name Cheryl?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and I think to Cheryl's point though, we'd still be offering at least those other opportunities.
Sure.
Under certain scenarios. So you'd have these two large schools that now serve the Ojai Valley in a specific way, but then we might actually keep our smaller schools and they could meet specific needs of specific families.
Would the three of you that are principals at the large schools, would you like to have 550 on your campus rather than what you have now? Do you see an advantage to the students that are there from doing that?
With the things we mentioned, absolutely, the extra teacher at grade levels, the ability to be more flexible with where you assign kids to teachers.
Not trying to play you off one against another.
Let me
Because obviously one would go away.
I've absolutely worked with 550 kids and it was beautiful. So, I mean, I don't see any problem with going up to 550.
And I just thought of something too.
Dawn had had a chance to.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'd like to hear
No, no.
from you.
No,
Me
no.
too.
But the two of you lived, you two, lived that life, right? Going back X number of years. You did, now, you did at Miners Oaks. Miners Oaks
Yeah, I
was a
taught
teacher,
grade
right?
18
Right.
at Miners Oaks.
As a teacher, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So you were there when Miners Oaks was that size,
Yes,
okay? And now you're half that size.
correct.
Okay, so how would you react to that concept of almost double what it was or what it is?
Right. When I was teaching all those years ago when we were at our largest at Miners Oaks School, I did rely a lot as a teacher now on other teachers, and we did a lot of sharing, and we definitely had a team. And that was great as a new teacher coming in, having veterans to help you along and work with. That was really neat. When you start to get smaller and there's just two of you sometimes, you know, you and another teacher, and you do great as a team, but I liked having a bigger team to work with you, and there were great advantages to that. As far as accommodating all the students, it's a little squishy sometimes when you do get to your bigger numbers, the luxuries. I remember that the library used to be in a very small room, and now it's in a classroom, so it's bigger. And we do have an art trek room, and I do have where my hourly teachers can go, and we even have a dedicated music room, which is nice, so the kids, like we said, can go out to things, but when we were at our largest, the services would come into us a lot. So you can work with a really big school, it's just different. So I've been in both scenarios. Both scenarios work. Being smaller and having extra rooms is nice. You do get to know everybody very well and the families, although the events we had when we were a big school, we still have them now as a smaller school. We're down to half our size. We still have our fall festival and our spring fling. We just had to put out more tables before, you know, when we were bigger, but we still did the same kinds of things we did at both sizes.
And those kinds of things are still doable at, say, the 550, like those kinds
Yes.
of like community building and.
Sure.
You know, there was something else that came to mind as we were talking, well, this is one of the things I think teachers would tell you is really makes it harder as schools get smaller. You know, we have a duty roster. Every year we come up with a duty roster.
That's what I was about, exactly.
We
what I
have
was about to say.
recess duty, we have before school adjunct duties, and so it used to be you had one, maybe two adjunct duties for the year, and now you have a lot of adjunct duties for the year because you're down to 14 teachers. So, yeah, there's definitely,
That was
yeah.
actually one of the two things I was saying, because I've had conversations, particularly with Dawn and Teresa, where we've had, are you gonna have 9 teachers or 10 or 4 or 5? And they remind me, and I know it, all the same things have to be done, right? As you're spreading out those things across a very small number of people, you know, so, I mean, think about that. A couple of years ago, we had 4 teachers at San Antonio. We've always had 2 or 3 at Summit. All the same things have to be done. Now, albeit with a smaller number of students, but, you know.
Still have SSG meetings, you still have
and
recess
all those
meetings.
things.
Yeah.
That's one issue. The other thing to think about, and, you know, Andy and Josh can help the committee on this. When you start pushing that 20, 21, 22 at a 24 or 5, whatever, and you want to have an order, you can always go get a room. You can get rooms, you can get mobile units, get portables, right? You got a lot of space out there. You can create a place to put art and or music, okay? And I would hope that, and I know this committee wouldn't do it, that you would never make a decision or never make a recommendation as to what you think the board might consider as best, because we're one room short. You know, that's just, the issue's much too big to have that get in the way. First of all, you can move the boundaries, so you don't have, all of a sudden you're not one room short, right? The issue really comes down to, I think it's exactly, you know, what you've been talking about. That's why we tried to create number 7 the way we did. You can move numbers around. You know, you either have 2 places to put 1,100 students, or 3, or whatever you want, okay? But I thought today would be the best way, Glenn, I hope it's gone the way you wanted to talk about, yes, numbers, pushing limits of facilities, but more than that, you know, what are the advantages of these larger configurations? Okay?
Or disadvantages, yeah.
Yeah. I have a question. So we talked before about if a bigger school will have a principal and vice principal.
Good.
Is still that into the consideration?
Sure. I mean, I don't think you had one, did you? No, that's what I thought. When I went to visit Cheryl, I don't think you were hiding her or him, right? You didn't want me to talk to him or her, I know. You're like, what's it like working for Cheryl? I'm pretty sure I remember there wasn't one. Anyway, so, not necessarily, okay? Now, you're going back to that 6th grade study, when we had that 1,100 student middle school, there was a counselor or two and an assistant principal. That's bigger, different. We have an assistant principal at our junior high. So maybe at 550, no, there'd be no reason to assume that because Cheryl's there and we've had
With the committees or the previous committees for the 6th grade, moving the 6th grade to the middle school. I mean, if we were talking about moving Chaparral to another location earlier, should we take in consideration that if we recommended the number of possibilities go up exponentially if you move the 6th grade to the middle school, then you're talking about housing 1,100 students, and how many elementary schools do you need with 1,100 students instead of 1,328?
Yeah, we talked about that. I think it was maybe the committee or meeting or two before you came on. And I would ask, as you get closer to the end, that be not a footnote, but it ought to be a consideration to at least remind the board, not that they need it, but it would be good coming out of this committee for the public, when they read the report, to know that you are thinking about that, right? And that was the reason I put the committee together. I mean, I sort of figured we wouldn't be able to afford it. But I also didn't want to start studying the 6th grade 3 years from now, when we knew nothing about it. It was a totally new concept in Ojai, not in the county, but in Ojai. So I think we know a lot now. We'd have to make an adjustment or two. We already know that in Matilla. Matilla's not a very big place. It's not any bigger than those 3 elementary schools. Okay, so.
How'd you get all the high school students in there?
Yeah, good question.
40 years ago.
Yeah, good question. Good question. I don't know how we got 1,400 kids in Florida, but anyhow, the fact is, I think it should be part of your thinking, but not a predominant issue. That's just my opinion.
So would that mean that you'd have the same collaboration situation, but amongst the younger grades going up to 5th grade? So
Yeah,
ideally you'd
right.
have, so that sort of wouldn't change.
No.
But the school itself would actually stay smaller then? And you would then have the open classrooms, et cetera, et cetera?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So if you had, pick any one you want.
Yeah.
Instead of having to accommodate, as Rob was saying, instead of 1,325, it'd be 1,150 or something like that.
Yeah.
And you were on that committee, right, Glenn?
I was.
You were on that 6th grade committee, and yeah.
I seem to recall from reading the paperwork, almost every person recommended that if you moved
17 out of 20.
I would say there's a...
I thought I read all of them, but.
Yeah, a bit of a caveat to that, and that was if money were no object. And I think I'm done
Why is
hearing
that always the beginning of the sentence?
Money's always the object.
Yeah.
In fact, that's kind of...
Often.
Actually, that is how I asked the question, but eventually we asked a better question. And that was, okay, now that we know that, then I did ask the question, from a structural, educational, whatever viewpoint you want, okay? What would you support? And and by the way, just let me make sure I say this publicly. There was a huge amount of support, this is a school year ago, for the present 6th grade program and the present 6th grade teachers. That aside, the group looked at it, 17 out of 20 felt that the K-5, 6-8 structure was the stronger of the two. And then we did put a number on it, a dollar figure, which is a guess. And my number is about $150,000 to $250,000 by the time you do all the changes that you would want to do at a middle school. And that became prohibitive. Okay.
What was that money spent for?
It spent a little bit more teacher time. In the elective program, now you have 3 grades that have an elective program instead of 2. You would need some more administration, you would need some more custodial, you would need some more secretaries. Right?
And you didn't have to build new classrooms?
No. But you're pushing the limit, it's not that big a school. You know, we would have enough classrooms, and it depends on how you configure it, but we were looking at the sixth grade being predominantly in a discrete geographic part, you know, sort of like a wing. That's where the sixth grade wing would be, which is sort of the way most districts change from a K6, 7, 8 to K5 over a period of time. Classrooms with pretty much a separate environment, but not for everything, right? So you're not there just to be in a separate place. So, but it does cost, I would say, around $200,000 more, which is, you know, which is less than 1% of our budget, but that was back at a time, which was the 6th year out of 7, that the staff hadn't seen any increases in compensation, right? So if some period of time from now, we're able to accommodate with a much better economic environment in the state, obviously, way better. If we're able to see a future where that $200,000 isn't a boulder, it's a bit of an impediment, but it's not a boulder, then I think it could come back on the table. And it wouldn't do anything other than free up. It would never be a negative at the elementary level.
Right.
Except for those people who feel, and there is a group, who feel that 12-year-olds are way better situated with 8-year-olds than they are with 14-year-olds.
Yeah, I was just going on what I read, not.
Well, I mean, that was a point. It dissipated a bit, right, over the period of the conversation. In fact, I won't go with this one person, but a particular person who came to the first meeting who was like shaking.
Yeah.
You know, and the idea of having her child, you know, be a 6th grader with 7th, 8th graders. At the end, she didn't quite come to the point. She wasn't on the committee, by the way. She was a visitor, but came to every meeting. And at the end said, "I hear you. Made a good point. I'm reserving judgment."
And one of the things could have been a K-8, but I don't know how that played out. You could have had a K-8 for those younger 6th graders or those.
Oh, as a
more
choice.
socially- As a choice.
Not, we didn't look at that at the committee level. That was not part of the discussion. It could happen.
Choices like that, they get
Well, you had a
spread
group
out.
who wanted that and
They were
came to the
classrooms.
school board meeting
Oh, yeah.
prior to that
Sure.
conversation.
There have been some people who've made that argument.
And that's the big draw for inter-district transfers as well.
So
This is what we find out with the students who are leaving Ojai to go to the Ventura K Sunset.
There's some of those, some, not many. There are a lot more coming the other way.
And then Mupu is a huge magnet.
Yeah, that's a whole, well, I would say it's a whole different environment because it's the whole district. You know, where Sunset is a school among 20 elementaries or whatever.
But 6th grade
Sunset, I don't know Mupu at all, except I know
5, 6 classes.
superintendent. I think Sunset's a great school.
Well, it was one of the questions that came up when we were talking about how do we determine what repurposing we want to do if we don't know what the alternatives
That's a
are.
good point.
Repurposing for the school?
Well, the whole discussion that we had initially at our first meeting was, you know, other ideas beyond closing other opportunities that there might be.
Right.
And so we talked about magnets, we talked about K-8 configurations and things that we don't even know about.
Absolutely. I mean, at some point, you have to put boundaries around your own analysis. You know, and maybe I have my opinion that might be different than any one of the 11 of you. I think the fact that we're as far along as we are now, and you've done the quality of work that you've done, speaks to continuing on this path, as opposed to creating new paths.
Well, I think.
And not worry about it. First of all, it's not your job.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
We can't speculate, really.
The board will receive your recommendation as to how best to deal with 1,325 or whatever K-6 students, and absolutely guarantee you they'll want to meet with you. I know they will. Okay, they want to have you come back to a conversation. Because I know I'm going to recommend it. And then anyway, so then you can talk about any alternatives you want before the board makes a decision. Remember, the other thing I think I said at the beginning is you're going to finish your work theoretically around before spring break. And, you know, I have my own thoughts also about the proper calendar and amount of time that the board should take to make this decision, which I'm not going to share now. But one thing I will tell you for sure is that this district is doing just fine right now with 5 schools for 1,325 kids, okay? If we have 5 schools and 1,300 kids, next year, or 4 schools and 1,300 kids, we'll be fine in both ways. We have to decide how best to get to the end of the game, end of the story, taking into consideration things like history, emotions, what people feel is likely to be in place next year. Okay? And, you know, I'm going to, at some point, I'll share with the whole group or with Ben or whatever, some thoughts that I have about that part of the equation, okay? Because I have lived that. And I can tell you that it's not just school configurations. Great ideas can go right down the toilet because of the implementation plan, as opposed to the idea itself.
Right.
Well,
Or
I'm
the
gonna
communication
just
of
play
it.
a little bit of a devil's advocate here, because my first question when we met was, why are we doing this?
Right, I remember
So
that.
you said, you know, they were fine either way. So I still struggle with that question. I wanted to go back and listen to what your answer was, and maybe you'll tell it to me again. But, for that initial question. But when we were having the conversation the other day, I've been struggling, and I'm actually hearing some more things that are opening my mind to why we're having this conversation, and I'm hearing some really great things from the principals. But Gabby said at the meeting, probably the most direct thing that we were all kind of beating around the bush about. We're asking how many classrooms for each school, and Gabby said it would be more realistic to combine the schools and have less repair. I know that we're getting to that. Sometimes it does not make sense to try to repair all of the schools. We don't have the budget for all of them. And second, there's no need to have so many schools with all of the portables that are not used. It just doesn't make sense. So boom, the most direct comment that we've had. You know, just logically it doesn't make sense. Then Glenn is commenting and he says, look, we've got $35 million of bond money. We're pushing $4 million for each of these based on the Balfour Beatty estimates. That's a lot of money that we could save to apply to these other schools. We could apply $4 million. If we shut down one of the larger ones, we could apply $4 million. If we shut down one of the smaller ones, we'd have that money to apply to these other schools. So that was a really direct point. But I am not still persuaded that the path we're on is to close a school without knowing some of these other alternatives and giving them, and I'm a little bit,
Yeah, what are the other alternatives are you?
well, we talked about opportunities, we talked about like chaparral, we talked about magnets, we talked about the K configuration, we talked about things that we don't even know among our area. And then once you have on the agenda like 4 elementary configurations and you have it laid out, that's kind of the path that we start to go on. And you said versus going on a new path. I don't know that talking about these other alternatives is a new path. I think it's sort of where we started, sort of looking at all of the options. I just throw that out.
Okay. Well, let me take the one that has been, if there is one thing that might be an example of a new path that's been discussed the most since I've come here, and that is K-8. So, we all already know why Sunset became K-8, because they were losing kids in Matilla. So they then created 7-8. They were K-6 and it was 7-8, or K-5, and I think it was K-6. Anyway, one of those two. They didn't have the 7-8 configuration. Everybody has an opinion. In my opinion, there's not a logical reason to have a K-8 school in the Ojai Unified School District. It just isn't. First of all, I don't agree that as a basic concept, that in present day Common Core and everything else, that 12 to 14-year-olds or 13 and 14-year-olds are best educated in the same environment as 5 to 11-year-olds. I just don't. Okay? And so I don't see a pervasive reason to have a K-8 school in a district of this small geography. I understand why you would have one in the very north corner of a very large school district, okay, serving kids who live there. So they don't have to get on a bus and go really a long way to get into Ventura. I think the two situations are wildly different. The one thing, I will say this, if you want to just throw another option on the table, I'm not suggesting you necessarily do this, but here's one other concept that I think has merit, because I know it works in a number of places in the country, and that is what's really called a grade configuration arrangement. So for example, if you took In this case, I haven't even talked about Summit. So let me take Summit as the school that would be closed. If you wanted to have 4 elementary schools, and you wanted to have a real combination of teachers working together, you could geographically configure Miners Oaks and Miramonte together as a K-6 school, or K-5, but let's call it K-6 for now, with a K-2 campus and a 3-6 campus, or a K-3 campus and a 4-6 campus. That would be the school, obviously, let's call it West. Okay, West.
Yeah.
Okay, and the other 2 schools, you'd have to see how many classrooms. Let's say San Antonio would be K-1, and Topa would be 2-6 or 2-5. You would have the absolute epitome of grouping together teachers who work together.
For collaboration.
Okay? Now, in my opinion, just in my opinion, okay, I'm not pushing it, in my opinion, that is a far, far better concept for a place of our size than creating a K-8 environment within a situation where you already only have 400 7th, 8th graders. You're going to divert some of those kids into a 7th, 8th class. Now you 7th, 8th school. Now you have 320, and Matilaha is getting so small I wouldn't exactly know what program we could create, right? Whereas in Ventura, you have these enormous 6-8 schools, right?
Except you significantly lose something. In this demographic, Ojai Valley, you lose the choice of you lose that one option, the option of having a smaller school. You lose that.
Absolutely.
And I really think given, again, we kind of play down the competition with private schools, but I know the competition with private schools is significant among parents in Ojai Valley, and the small school option is incredibly important to parents.
I agree with that completely,
Yeah,
and that's why I said.
So even though theoretically, I totally understand what you're saying.
Wasn't advocating the great configuration. I'm just saying that in a situation, a smaller district, where you're trying to create some of the things that we were talking about before, right? Where you don't have to change boundary lines maybe so much, you just take existing boundaries. You can use the existing boundaries and have 7 grades in 2 places, but 1 school.
Yeah.
Would you wind up having to provide more transportation because the
No,
kids
because they're already there.
Well, I mean, but if you had K2, say in Miramonte and
They're
3-6.
close enough, so maybe a little, but not very, they're so
Okay.
close to each other.
I don't see a scale on the map, so I'm not sure.
Oh, well, they're.
They're 3 miles.
They're not.
I know it's a mile. I'm going
No, look,
to
yes,
find the
some.
scale and
Some.
start drawing circles around these schools.
Some.
But
Yeah.
you might, if like San Antonio was sort of, what did you say, either the
K1.
K, then you would have to bus people possibly.
To Topa.
To Topa.
Well, and Topa
And-
K1 over to
And
San
Topa to San
Antonio.
Antonio.
Right,
Yeah,
so there would be a
yes.
lot of like weird transportation.
Yeah, like I said, I didn't say it was
Yeah.
perfect. I just said
It's
that
an
there's,
option.
that if you're throwing out some options, that's an option I've seen done in smaller districts where the corpus of students isn't big enough in any one element, or some elementary schools, you create a bigger corpus by having not all 7 grades in every place.
Yeah.
So if we're getting down to brass tacks, that's what we're talking about, an ideal in terms of what the principals are saying, to have 2 of the large schools remain and 1 of the large schools go away.
I don't know that they were saying that specifically. I think they were just, because I think this is another alternative that
Scenario.
you're speaking of. To have, they were talking about greater collaborative opportunities in a school, in a larger population.
I appreciate Maria taking up the idea of alternates to school closure in looking at other scenarios. And for instance, where that strikes me is the magnet school option. For instance, we've got Measure J funds with $36 million, which can be leveraged against other grants that the State Water Quality Control Board offers for retrofits to schools that will enhance rainwater and stormwater capture to the tune of $5 million. If we have a planning budget in place, or a flood plan in place, we can leverage towards creating magnet schools that are focusing on that. And I think that that's worth looking at, as rather than just this, okay, which of these schools are we going to close?
Well, and to that, David, you have the opportunity which I think we have in some degree, to grow our enrollment, because we have declining enrollment, we'd like to bolster that. And then you have some ideas that Chris and I are having, just had conversations about after the meeting. Like, he's got an idea that just blows my mind for Ojai Unified, that I think would draw even more students. So how important is attracting more students to Ojai?
I think it's hugely important.
But we already attract a large number of students.
We have a you already know that, we have a disproportionate net, basically 300 in, 100 out, or less than that, 250 and 50. So we have a net 200 plus out of 2,600 kids. That's a big, the only one I know that's bigger than that on a percentage is Oak Park. And the reason they're bigger is because of where they are. Okay, so, and whatever. So what I would love to have another 50 or 100 students. And I think that the decision that the board makes following your recommendation and having plans to get more students are not inconsistent. I think you can do both. Okay?
Can you say that again?
Yeah, I think that, I don't think it's an either or. I don't think it's like, either you make a decision about how to handle 1,325 elementary students by trying to determine what is the best configuration of schools, or you don't do that and wait until you can figure out how to have a creative environment to bring more students. I think you can do both. I just simply, in my opinion, I don't think the second one drives the first one. I don't think it does. I think you can sit and talk about creative options for years, okay? And never get to the issue of how best to handle the students. So the purpose of this committee, it's not that you should never talk about those ways of getting more students, because nobody would rather have more students than I do. I deal with it every week. We have kids wanting to come in, and we decide whether or not we have space, and pretty much the answer is almost always yes. Okay, so I love the idea of that. I just simply don't think that if you have 1,325, which is the number we're using, K-6 students, that it's going to become 2,025 by some creative ideas about how to get kids here. I don't, because we already have, by volition, a huge number of students coming here, predominantly geographically driven by Oakview, okay, and some Santa Paula, and they're here for 13 years in some cases, okay? And they represent, again, a number for you, we have 725 students or so in Nordoff. Over 100 are inter-district kids. Okay, so.
It's easy enough with Nordoff because there's only one school.
Oh, right.
But if we were to close one of the big elementary schools, then we're more or less at capacity for the.
Well, if you close one of the big elementary schools, particularly Miramani or Viney's Oaks, you're going to be swimming upstream.
Yeah.
Okay, on the inter-district piece. You will be.
But we wouldn't make that choice. We would just recommend a closure, correct? Would it be the school
boards?
boards?
I'm trying to get to the issue of getting more kids.
Okay.
I'm telling you that if you close one of the two schools on the west side, okay, and one of your future goals is to have more inter-district kids, you're starting behind the starting line.
Not if you ultimately are going to move your sixth grade, though.
Excuse me?
Not if you're ultimately thinking about moving your sixth grade.
Maybe even then. I'm not talking about space now.
Oh, you're not?
I'm talking about, we know that there are reasons, there are reasons why people who live in the north end of Ventura, let's call it Oakview for now,
Okay.
come to either Miners Oaks or Miramani. Okay? I do not think that 100% of them would continue, hypothetically,
Onto Toba
would continue to come if only one of those two existed.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well, and
And same with.
the other side of the same coin is with Summit.
Exactly. If Summit were to close, and 15 kids, that's sort of round number, 15 of our present 40, I'm rounding off, come from Santa Paula. It's been more than that some years, maybe a little less some, but let's call it 15. Okay, if 15 are coming from Santa Paula to Summit, and Summit closed, those same 15, all 15 wouldn't go to San Antonio.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Right. Now, some would, but for reasons that you can figure out.
Do you think if we closed a small school, say we close San Antonio, would we lose some of our students who go there to private schools?
Yeah, I think we would.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have?
Because it's got that.
Yeah.
I couldn't give you a number, but I think the answer is absolutely yes.
Yes.
And so, the answer is yes.
The answer is yes.
Because even though the class sizes are exactly the same, and they're all combination classes.
The perception.
The culture
It is a
is
small school,
Right.
truly small, which mirrors, an Ojai Valley School or a UFA, not Valley Road, obviously, or Besson Hill or whatever. If you're thinking about it, like, and that was exactly why you called me today, right? There was a student, I won't name the private school, who desperately wanted to come, right? Right? And we had a space, it was kindergarten. Kindergarten. Wanted to come, that's exactly why I got a call, wanted to come, San Antonio, from a private school. Can we accommodate them like tomorrow? And we are.
I mean, it's the
That's so
beauty
great.
of what makes this district really, I think, special.
Exactly.
Because you have that sort of balance, and I think we work with it, unlike districts that you're mentioning that just don't
Well,
work
that's
with that
what
at all.
Cheryl said, there was not a perfect school for every child.
Yes, yeah, I think those are really
But we
important things
just,
to
we
notate.
just need every single school having a problem and losing either inter-district transfers or private schools. So and then you come down to, if you're just waiting on that side, like which are you gonna lose the most?
Well, I think the one that would be least affected, probably, the one is, if Topa Topa is in a geographical place, and if you look at the configuration of students, okay, there's a very small number of inter-district kids that are there compared to the totality of the students, right? Okay. So if you look at Miners Oaks, Miramati, and Summit, San Antonio is different because those kids come from our own place, okay? But I think Topa Topa is probably the one that's the most structurally intact and would be least affected by whatever it is we would do here, unless you close it.
Because it's right in the heart of
That's
the
right,
neighborhood,
exactly.
and it serves.
I mean, that's sort of how I interpret what we have, right? So the others at the corners, that's what you want to call it, right? Where you have a huge number of students
Influx.
coming from Oakview and a pretty decent percentage coming from Santa Paula, right? If you have 15 out of 40, that's a pretty big percent. So they would be most affected, obviously.
So that's it, I'm sorry.
Yeah, oh no, that's okay. I want to thank Glenn and Andy and Hank for getting together and putting this together like the day before the break. And I really want to thank the principals for being here. And really, for me, it's not so much about metrics as it is about culture and community. And I so appreciate you guys speaking to that. And Merv for bringing up the collaboration. And I've learned so much tonight. Thank you guys so much.
But we still have to get it, I'm still completely confused on what we're looking at in terms of what schools, why would we want to close any of them if they all bring something to the district?
Okay.
And is closing a smaller school amount to a hill of beans in terms of these numbers that you're talking about that enhance the educational? And are we putting at risk some of the students that we're trying to attract? And then are you saying, even though Topa Topa is geographically serving an intact neighborhood, maybe that's the one that would close? If we're
No,
looking at
I'm not
all sorts
saying
of possibilities,
No.
because then we're still gonna be attracting, we're still gonna be attracting all of the inter-district students. We're still gonna be providing the small school environment for the families who want that. And people from Topa Topa are going to be going to any of those schools, and they're not going to be affected in terms of staying in Ventura or Santa
Well, let me be
Paula.
clear, number one, I'm not saying that. Number two, if you close Topa Topa, you're closing a school with 460 kids out of 1,328 are directly affected. Okay? Number three, you have the smallest percentage of inter-district kids at Topa. Okay? That's what I mean by centrally intact. Okay. Now, I've never said, in fact, in yesterday's high school newspaper, I nicely corrected and admonished the person who wrote the editorial from the previous newspaper, where the person said the point of this committee is to close the school.
Right.
Okay, and I wrote back to the paper. Okay, I'll send you a copy. So I've been absolutely protective of the 5-school option.
Yeah.
And continue to be, okay? I'm saying that I can see a recommendation coming out of this committee when you weigh all of the factors that might lean where you were simply stating a fact. And that is that the best configuration for the next 10 to 15 years plus is 5 schools.
And
But I
think-
absolutely can see a 4-school option. And by the way, there's some people talking about a 3-school option. Okay? So you just need 1,325 seats.
So, Marianne, I think it's just important for us as a committee, whatever we decide, given the fact that Measure J passed and we have this huge chunk of taxpayer money that the district is now responsible for.
It's not the same kind of money, though.
No,
right?
but I'm just,
No,
the point I'm trying to make
is
is just that it's significant that we examine, it's
Yes.
significant to the taxpayers that we examine every option. We don't have to close a school. We could, we may not. I think it's been so helpful having the principals here. But I think the general, like if you imagine it as a mushroom, the general operating idea is we're given this whole chunk of money, we have to responsibly use it.
Yes.
And it's our job to figure out like what's the most responsible way. And even having this committee is part of the responsible way of using the money. Even if we ultimately say, all the schools are.
I'm not opposed to closing a school if that were the balance of the benefit. I guess I'm seeing there's a lot to weigh and how do you scale those? So I have some more questions that I didn't have before, and I'm getting from you that it's counterintuitive to close TOPA, but actually I'm kind of thinking about what that would mean, because I think it's always been everyone's assumption that keeping TOPA is just a natural thing that we would do because it is where it is, all of the things that you just rattled off.
You seem to be ascribing words to me that I didn't say. I did not say it was counterintuitive.
I'm saying
Oh, you're saying that-
to me,
oh,
it seems
okay.
counterintuitive because my assumption all along, whenever I talk about the 7-Eleven committee or a possibility of a school closure, people say, well, of course, TOPA has, the all the things that you said.
Yeah.
The anti-population,
It is.
the heart
right.
of the town.
It's the one, and in state of fact, it's the one of the 5 schools that's in the middle of the 5. That's all, okay?
And actually
and-
services its actual
Yeah.
district
And when
completely
you look at the
effectively.
construction, when you look at the construction of 457 students, it has the most intact, right, by those people who live there compared to those who don't. Although there's a lot of intra-district there too. It has the most of that scenario. I'm not suggesting that TOPA's off the table because of that. I'm just saying that's.
Certainly it's not. We're at 9 o'clock. I want to say, I feel like every option is available to us, and we are certainly pursuing a specific path here, but I hope that no one on the committee feels like we're doing so at the exclusion of other ideas. And if you're having conversations outside of here and want information, or you want to propose an idea, this is the place to do it, and we can get it on the agenda. So let me know.
Gabby?
I wanted to say that we have to keep in mind that the main issue is, well, first is, yes, the budget, but also that we have a low enrollment, and this is not happening just overnight. It's been going on. And then if we think about it, to keeping the 5 schools, they're gonna go back to the same, where we are right now in 5 years, because they've been trying to figure out 5 years ago, or maybe longer than that.
I mean, I'd really like to, I agree with that. I'd also like to really examine or think about ideas about reasons for inter-district transfers. If you look at all the schools, you see that Miners Oaks obviously has more students leaving its community and going to other schools. And that San Antonio is a much larger disproportional, where the other two are about 30%. Maybe we could talk about reasons and perceptions, community feelings in those communities about why
Inter or intra?
intra. Why students are leaving Miners Oaks neighborhood, and who those students are and where they're going, and why maybe, and just kind of a conversation around that to understand the community. I think we represent most every neighborhood here in the valley. Maybe we can talk about perceptions, and I think that's a good opportunity for the principals to kind of bring some
Do we
ideas
have
in
the
too.
same demographics in Miners Oaks and Miramonte?
Not precisely, no. No, we don't. And I mean, I can give you those facts, just easily.
Yeah. I was like,
Right, well, Miners Oaks has 50. Let's not play with percentages too much. Half again, if you take Miramonte as an entity of socioeconomically challenged families, stay there. Miners Oaks would have almost half again as many. percentage-wise. Not number-wise, percentage-wise.
Of economically challenged?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, 40 to 60, I'm just rounding off, okay? Low 30s, high 30s to low, high 50s, whatever it might be, okay? In terms of the ethnicity and Spanish-speaking predominantly families, it might be quite similar relationship percentage-wise.
Similar
Similar
percentage-wise.
difference, I'll send it out to you, but similar difference percentage-wise, with a higher percentage in Miners Oaks than Vermont.
Would that be the case if they didn't
Higher
have, if so many students weren't leaving the neighborhood for other
Well,
schools?
that I
You said a
right,
higher
tell you that.
percentage at which school?
A higher percentage in Miners Oaks.
Because when we're talking,
Business.
when we're talking about, community perceptions, a lot of school closures come down to communities saying you're picking on our school because we are the poorest.
I agree with
we are
that,
the-
which would
so I
never
think-
happen here, in my opinion.
But it would be a perception that we'd have to address.
I couldn't disagree with that, okay? People will have a perception if we close any particular school as to why that happened. But I do think there's that if you're simply looking at the facts, back at the February board meeting, we'll be looking at some of that, because we're gonna be looking at all 5 elementary schools' information. I don't wanna go too long, because it's past 9. But I'm answering your question, yes, there are differences. Topa and Miramani are quite similar. Very, very similar. San Antonio would be a little bit on the other end from where Miners Oaks is compared to the 2 larger schools. Okay? Some that depending on the configuration of the 40 students. Okay, it varies year to year.
Very poor statistics to work with.
With 40 students, yeah. That's one of the reasons why their school total test number sometimes wasn't even calculated. Anyway, I'd be happy to get you that. It's all public information. Actually, it's on our website.
Right.
You get it.
Good. Anything else?
Next meeting?
28.
January 28th, last Thursday of the month. And then 1, 2 weeks after that, 1, 2 weeks after that.
28, 14, 28.
Yeah.
And is there something specific you want us to think about for the next? That's fine.
Well,
That-
certainly if there's ideas out there that you want to bring
Well,
back
are we
to
still
the
gonna do
meeting.
the survey, Linda?
Yeah, I actually talked to Hank about that via email. I'm not sure.
Remind me, was that the one about where you're gonna
Yes.
ask the principals about what they'd like to have?
Yes.
I think that was already done.
It was done in a newspaper.
It's not the
I wanted to
14th,
flesh it out a little bit,
Is it the 7th?
but, Hank felt like it had already been
Well,
answered.
it was, Kim did.
35th would be,
I mean, and
Yeah.
it was great to read. I was wondering about,
Specifics.
where is this place that is being constructed?
Okay.
But they all said it in a great way, yeah.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
That was the survey, wasn't it?
and then the
Wasn't that the
25th.
survey? They were gonna-
Yeah, it was a jump, I recommended the article itself was a jumping off point to give the principals a chance to flesh out that statement, but, okay,
I'm not gonna weigh in on it. I just know the article was written.
okay.
This
However you
meeting-
guys feel.
This meeting tonight was by design, looking at non-fiscal impacts
Exactly.
of our alternatives.
Which I like.
And that's critical that we do that. At the same time, I'm with
Mary Ann.
in asking if the fiscal impacts are not important here,
Oh, they are.
because we can survive with 5 schools or 4 or even 3, then why are we tying ourselves up in knots trying to figure out what to do?
It's what Melanie
If-
spoke to.
I mean,
about the
I talked to Josh
responsibility.
after the
Yeah.
last meeting, head of maintenance, transportation, and operations. He's got 2 janitors and 2 groundskeepers. And right now, they have to maintain, what is it, 8 campuses?
Yeah, mechanics.
How do they do it?
Well, it's a hell of a question.
They don't. They don't. It's very easy.
It's a good question.
And so while we have to look at the non-fiscal impacts of all this, we cannot ignore the fiscal impacts.
Okay.
We've got, I just took one look, and this was, we talked about closing Summit tonight. If we lost all 17 students back to Santa Paula, and we saved the custodial grounds and water and gas and electric, that's small numbers, but we avoided the need C repairs to that facility, that's a net savings of almost $700,000. And that's a small school.
Right, remember, you were the one who said a half an hour or 45 minutes ago,
Yep.
these are not the same dollars. Right, so the dollars of needs.
Not looking at the faculty dollars,
Right. but you
anything
can't-
else.
They're not the same dollars, right? Because we would take that money, if you were talking about Summit, you take that money that we would have spent at Summit and spend it some other place.
Still get spent.
Because we're like $65 million below where I'd like to be, in terms of
And
measure
in
J.
5 years, Summit brought in $750,000
Right.
in interdistrict
In the small
students.
schools.
And that is right.
Interdistrict students, and it would repeat that.
So let me go back and also say, what I said about 5 schools or 4 schools, I said for a year. For a year. Okay, I'm not suggesting that there is no difference, that's a double negative. There is a difference between, there is a difference between having 5 and 4 schools in the Ojai Unified School District. There is. What I'm saying is that for a year, we're doing fine. I think we could do fine.
We could kick the can down the road
We could
for
do
a
that.
year.
I think we can do fine in either environment, 5 or 4 schools for a year, and maybe more than a year. It just isn't the same. Just because you're doing fine doesn't mean you're doing the best.
Right.
Or better.
Not being most
And I
efficient.
think our point is to do the best we can, including resources. And there are savings. They're just not enormous because the great majority of costs are personnel. And generally, when you close a place, you move that personnel to the new place.
Right, you don't save any of that.
You save some, but it would depend on which one. It would depend on which one you choose. And it obviously costs less to operate Summit than it does Miramati or Miners Oaks or Toba or San Antonio.
I would like to ask that, Mary Ann, once you have the meeting with Chris, my heart, it's all about marketing and bringing more people into the school district itself. If you two come up with something that you think would benefit, we would need to know about at this committee. Would that be okay to request them to present that?
Well, nothing to me, I'm just
No,
listening to
it's
Chris telling me his amazing ideas, and that's just one of several alternatives that.
Yeah, maybe
I'm
it's
happy to
something.
present it. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't affect the elementary schools, it's a high school program.
Oh.
Well, I'd like to hear that
Well,
anyway.
Outside of this
Yeah, I'm really-
committee.
Okay, you've got to hit the
Let's
gavel.
adjourn.
Thank you.